concentremos en las manos, soltemos el celular, quiten la computadora, todo lo que estén ahorita haciendo, olvidémoslo un momento, por favor, les pido atención de este lado. Quiero que se relajen, el cuerpo, que se sienten lo más cómodo posible, descansen los brazos, dejen todo, quiten ahorita computadoras, olvídense de todo. Vamos a tratar de concentrarnos, vamos a tratar de escucharnos también por dentro, ¿vale? Vamos a intentar, este va a ser el reto, que logren escuchar su corazón. Literalmente, vamos a tratar de escuchar nuestro corazón. Y obviamente también simbólicamente. Entonces primero vamos a sentarnos, relajar, pónganse en una posición cómoda, que vamos a estar ahí un buen rato. Manos, descánsenlas, ponte cómoda, o más comodita, por favor. Y cerremos los ojos, por favor. Lo que ustedes se sientan lo más cómodo, cierren los ojos. Y vamos respirando. Vamos a empezar inhalando fuerte. Cerramos los ojos y respiramos hondo. Que se escuche. Concéntrense en su respiración. Ahora vamos a hacerlo. Van a inhalar durante 3 segundos. 1, 2, 3. Lo mantenemos ahí y lo soltamos. 1, 2 y 3. Volvemos a inhalar fuerte, 3 segundos. 2, 3. Lo mantenemos un momento y lo soltamos. Ojos cerrados, todas y todos. Tratemos de ir hacia adentro. Olvidémonos de todo lo que está afuera. Close your eyes. Really? Try. Ahora, sigan respirando profundamente. E imagínense un lugar que les gusta mucho. Ese lugar que les gusta demasiado, en donde se sienten muy bien. Imagínense ese lugar, mentalícenlo, ténganlo ahí. Explórenlo. Vean qué colores hay. Identifiquen ese lugar que les hace sentir muy bien. Caminen en él. Explórenlo. Vean cada detalle de lo que hay ahí. Mantenemos la respiración. Respiren profundo ese aire tan limpio, tan lindo que hay ahí. Nos olvidamos de todo lo demás. Solo estamos en ese lugar. Y hagan lo que más les guste hacer ahí. Si es una playa, métanse al mar, corran por la arena. Si es un bosque, escuchen los pájaros, escuchen el río que corre. Vivan ese lugar. Continuamos la respiración profunda. Ahora vean hacia arriba de ese lugar y vean el sol o la luna. ¿Qué tal si es de noche? Está la luna. Y si es un lugar cerrado, ¿qué tal si es un cuarto? Vean el foco que está arriba de ustedes, el sol, la luna, una estrella. Vean esa luz. Traten de concentrarse en ella. concéntrense en los sonidos. Vamos escuchando todo lo que hay a nuestro alrededor. Mi voz, unos pasos que suenan, alguna voz lejana. Perciban todos los sonidos que hay a su alrededor. Presten atención a esos sonidos lejanos. Y ahora traten de escucharlo cada vez lo que hay más cerca de ustedes. Traten de irse acercando. Hay un sonido.
There is a sound swirling around, perhaps in the sky. Now concentrate and listen and hear your own breathing. Air that comes in through your nostrils, through the nose. So pay attention to the sound of the air as it leaves your body. We breathe deeply and we listen and hear how the air is coming into our lungs. Watch and hear your own breathing. Concentrate on the breathing. Are you listening to the breath deep inside of you? And you can feel your heartbeat. And take your brain to where your heart is and feel it. You can feel that thumping in your chest. And identify that sound. It goes strong, it's constant, is it soft? So please concentrate on that. Feel how the heart is thumping. Concentrate and hear that. This is your sound, it's exclusively your own sound, so look for it. Try to listen to that thumping of your heart. You just feel that thumping in your chest. All 5 senses are directed to that. Try to hear it, listen to it. Put your hand over your heart. We feel that thumping of your heart. That constant thumping of your heart inside your chest. Feel it, hear it, and try to understand what it says to you. What is it commenting or saying to us? Listen to it carefully. Then we rest So we start breathing deeply and we expel the air. As you're feeling these sensations, slowly open your eyes. So continue breathing normally. So this is something that helps us a great deal. Thank you very much. Process. Let's continue. Can somebody, can you help me to put off the lights up here? Who was able to see the documentary, short documentary on the Zapatista snails? About half, we would say.
Okay. Ahora, alza la mano. ¿Quién ha escuchado hablar sobre el EZLN?
Something about the EZLN in general. I think that most of us have seen this movement, the EZLN Indian movement in Chiapas, that has many characteristics. And the first question that probably is round in your heads is, why does an armed movement, it's an army, what does that have to do with civil disobedience and non-violent struggle if they have weapons? They have machine guns, they formed an army, they have military discipline. What does that have to do with these other elements? So, as we're going to explain this, we'll try to answer that question. I believe this is the first thing in our minds. So I'm going to talk to you about the history, the origins, to be able to understand where this comes from and why we understand that Zapatismo can be found in all of the civil resistance movements in the world. In the context, in 1994, there was a treaty of free trade treaty with North America. This is going Mexico into neoliberalism. And this is the beginning of the Zapatista movement. And this is an armed movement. They took 5 municipalities by force. They had war, they had armed fights from both sides. And they appear before the world. We are the product of 500 years of struggle. This is what they say. This is interesting because they do not consider themselves only a movement that revendicates local titles, matters of Chiapas, that sort of thing, but they consider themselves the inheritance of the resistance fighting in Latin America. Since 1994, we have a brief background, which is 92. What happened in 92? What took place in 1992? The discovery. This is the official version. But what was proposed by these indigenous groups in Latin America, the beginning of the 500 years of resistance from 1492. In Chiapas, they turned over the statue of one of the conquerors. And this was something that was coming out. The EZLN rises in 1983 in March, and this took 10 years to be able to come to light, to be prepared. So there we can understand from that process of 10 years to prepare an armed rebellion, everything that implies matter formation, education, construction of bases on these communities. They say that the first revolution was the promulgation of the revolutionary law of female of Zapatista women in 1983. So they also question the tradition, the patriarchy, the matriarchy, women could not decide with whom to marry or what to do in their life. This is one of the first points of the Zapatismo, to break with certain cultural patterns such as alcoholism, absolute prohibition of drugs and alcohol in all of the Zapatista territories, because this was a cause of violence and because this was a tool of colonization to bring alcohol to the Indian peoples to be able to control them up to date with drugs. So in 94 they come with this plea of what they call the declarations of this jungle. They not only provide the reason for their struggle, but their political problem. What were they searching for? It's not just a reivindication because of indigenous matters. So we are the inheritors of 500 years of fighting against slavery, imperialism, oppressive governments, dictatorships, etc. These are the product of a historical process of social struggle that have been deployed in Mexico as well as Latin America. What is their philosophy? They are deeply influenced by the theology of liberation. I know the very Archbishop of Chiapas is one of the great theologians of this. The theory of liberation is theology of liberation, in which Marxism is adapted to Christian teachings, especially to evangelists. So you probably know more than this. There are many movements of liberation in Salvador, Chiapas, and Colombia. So that the theology of liberation is one of the main columns of many of the movements of Latin America. Zapatismo was no exception, but there was a very interesting characteristic. It rises from the Indian cosmogonism. So sometimes it will be that Indians do not have a political tradition, they do not generally have a process, they do not have a tradition to be organized, and this is absolutely false. All the theology of liberation is what taught them to become organized. That's not right. They had previous processes of organization. All of these indigenous populations in Latin America have strong political structures, a tradition that is very strong, and this is recovered by Zapatismo. That's very interesting. They are based on the cosmic vision of the Mayas. All these from the Maya teachings. And there's a component that I enjoy, which is called a little word, which is tic. The tic seems us, means us. And in the Maya cosmovision, the tic is very clear. They use it after every word, every sentence. What does this mean? They do not conceive the world from the I and you, me and you. It's all us, we. They understand reality from the collective point of view. The indigenous peoples in Chiapas based on this cosmovision. Of course, there's some variations to this, and we have the Maoris also have a similar tradition in Africa as far as I and the other as a unit. So the tic of the Mayas comes in fully into Zapatismo. It is they who are establishing the movement, influenced by these Western theories, Marxism, liberation, but they also have their own cultural nuclei and their own cosmic visions. So this is a movement that comes from the collective group that is organized through processing consensus and assembly. So this is very important. In this case, we see very often the respect to Mother Earth, the ancestors, the cosmic vision of the Mayas, with time as a parallel basis. Time for Maya is not linear, it's a simultaneous circular effort. So in the future and today we live together at the same time. So many of these declarations are there. And we are the product of 500 years of struggle. They consider themselves contemporary to the struggles throughout history. So Zapatismo is very interesting and a special characteristic. Many movements following Zapatismo take over. Before that there were other indigenous movements, but they had not accepted the cosmic vision as a central point. And this comes from Zapatismo, but not only vindicating the guerrilla route of the Marxism, but they have a basis of the struggle. And this is a great contribution of the Zapatistas. A little bit of history. When they rise in January 1994, they take over the municipalities. They have this armed confrontation that lasts for about 15 days, not even 20 days. And then there's a very strong repression, the killing of the Mandela, the Chenalo, the killing of other places. There are very strong campaigns against them. And they discovered that they had taken weapons for war and they were not sufficiently prepared for that. So not only that they wanted to use their weapons, but they said they appealed to all civil society. This movement belongs to all, not just Indians or Zapatistas. We're all Mexicans. We must go into this thing. From 95, 96, it became very popular that we are all Marcos. I do not know if you're a very strong campaign. We are all Marcos. We are all clandestine. We are oppressed. We are the other one, that person that has been forgotten by society. So they start a series of actions with civil society, meetings, expressions, marches, caravans, dialogues with the government. And Zapatismo, from that time onwards, has not shot a single bullet. More than 20 years of struggle, and starting having an army, they have not shot a single bullet in more than 20 years. And this is where I can see that we must take this into consideration. Zapatismo has a different movement that established by its own tradition, and this comes also from the guerrilla warfare.
But they don't see the guns as the central point of their struggle. Their struggle is a civil one. And what we saw in the video of the males is that they're starting to advance and they are asking for autonomy. What is autonomy? To have their own territory where you control, you generate your own laws, and finally you are independent. This doesn't mean that they want to have independence from the country. It's different, autonomy from independence. They don't want to have a parallel state. What the Zapatistas want is to have their own country. No. They have not said that. We don't want to be independent, but we want territorial autonomy. We want to have our own laws, our culture, our policies in education and health, so we can govern ourselves. We do not need what they call the bad government, because they say we have a good government. It's not anarchism either. Yes, we want a good government, it's not anarchism, and Zapatistas are very clear on this. Very well, as I tell you, they are based in their culture, in the Maya cosmovision, and this is what has given them permanence. They are more than 30 years as a movement, because they have a very broad tradition of hundreds of years, and they have been able to gather in their struggle not only the indigenous but also people from other areas. They have included all the sectors in their struggle. The indigenous is only that person that lives in a traditional community. They have understood that the oppressed, we are all, and they have integrated a great diversity of oppressed people. The LGBT, the feminists, struggles for the students, the Afros, national, international. Constantly they are generating international meaning in their territories to unite their struggles with other movements. I have participated in this, some of this, and it's an amazing exchange. Something like this, that we're willing to change the things, and they are doing these things, and it's beautiful. There was one in December only for women, and it was something very powerful, and it was organized by the Zapatistas. One of their premises is they want to look for another thing to make policy. How we think another way of political action besides the traditional one. So I think they have always looked for this. How do we generate another ways of actions, maybe more creative, not the traditional ones? Let's try to find alternative means of struggle. And this is one of the actions. They are also the first cyber guerrilla. They have launched caravans. This is Comandante Marcos in the Sultana of the city. In one of the galleries, they made a caravan from the southern part, from Chiapas to the southern part of Mexico. And it was incredible, the coalition. They have done several. One is with the other, the color of the earth or the land, and the last one was in 2006, and the other ones have been smaller. But I think this is from the campaign in 2006-07, around that time, where there was that revolution in Atec. They was going to build an airport, and there was a great repression from the government. They have done activism, thousands of mobilizations, but what I would like to point out is how are they building this other possible world. We want a world where many worlds can fit. They understand diversity, and they understand that a movement cannot be isolated. It has to generate coalitions, and this is important in the civil resistance, to create coalitions, to create alliances, groups. And if there are now these coalitions, and the people from Nicaragua know, it's very hard to move forward if we don't agree between different groups. If we do not create a bloc, it's hard to move forward. And Zapatismo has been able to create the Indigenous Council of Government, which is a national organization that gathers all the indigenous people or all the communities that want to be part of this, because there are also regions that are in favor of some other political parties. The same in Chiapas. This has been a strategy to divide the communities. But great part of the indigenous movements are under this council, which is the creation of the EZLN. The other campaign was precisely calling to generate another ways of doing policies, to rebuild the country and gather people from the whole world. So in the other campaign, we have people from the planet and people with international support networks supporting the Zapatismo. For example, they produce coffee and they send to Europe, United States, and it's sold, and the money goes back to the communities, and this generates more productive projects, arts and crafts for women. So this support networks, like the Indigenous Council or the other campaign, has allowed Zapatismo to move away and go internationally. The Zapatista school, this was a very interesting experiment where they say, we are going to teach you how autonomy is, but we are not teachers, we are not academicians. You are going to come and you're going to spend here with us, I think, for 2 weeks to be within a Zapatista community, living with a family and learning what is to build autonomy, but with your hands. a hands-on, not like here that we're just speaking theoretically. It was a hands-on approach, working on the land, picking up coffee and cocoa. So they knew about the medicinal plants, the alternative medicine. So this was a very interesting experiment to open Zapatismo to the world. Anybody could come here. You would stay in a community and they will locate you and teach you, give you some books. So it was a very interesting experiment to keep including more people in their movement. All of this is in the webpage of the Zapatista movement. And speaking about women, for them the first big revolution was to have this law of the Zapatista women, that there were some rights that traditionally did not exist in the communities. So they took a very active role with this movement. There is not a division that this is only for men and for women. And in indigenous communities with a very strong machismo, this was a great achievement. To that also that men, they were able to make men accept and or if they want to be part of the militia or teachers, they are open. So they have been able to transform what has been the traditional way and the traditional role of women in the indigenous communities. And this also happens in the Zapatista communities. There has been a meeting. This was the second international meeting of women, and they are generating spaces to also speak about gender violence that is so strong in Mexico. And there's a great amount of mobilizations in Mexico. I think that the biggest march was the Mexican one, due to the problem that we have. And there is an awakening also, and we are all aware of this topic. But this is a space only for women. Men were not accepted, not even gays or trans. So this is women's rights for women and only women. And this was a space because there were testimonials and it was very freeing for the ones they attended. The women felt trusted in a safe space without harassment. And this is the second one that they have. And there you have a small phrase that they have communicated. And I don't know if somebody would like to read. If we don't hear each other as women, it doesn't work. What are we doing? Because it means that we are not women, that we're fighting for others, but only that our idea or our group or our organization is the one that matters. So in this sense of collectivity, that we have to listen to each other, that we have to feel together, and it's amazing the Zapatism as an army is open. There's a spaces it has done for any type of meetings like art, education, music, academic meetings. Also, Eduardo Galeano also went there with Zapatismo to speak with the people like Pablo González Casanova. The big theoreticians of the left have been there and have contributed. Harm Negri have been there. So it's strong, the calling that Zapatismo can have, and it's one of the most coherent movements that have lasted through times in spite of the attacks of the government, the struggle with the new and old governments. They have not accepted any government, not even the current one of López Obrador, that he says that he is left. And they denounce him. They say he's a neoliberal. They are going to destroy the jungle. They are killing socialists. This government is not a change at all. It's a continuity. It's the only movement that has dared to say this out loud. And now when the people said, well, Zapatismo is going to be happy with this government that has an indigenous agenda, they untook the mask that they had, and they have denounced them.
Tal vez el actual presidente
The current president of Mexico,
gobernantes
some governors of this country have gone through the Zapatismo? No. Or have they been in the government? No, never, no one. They are completely against the government. They have said even that you don't have to vote, that structure doesn't work. They have not been closed, they have not been assembly members. The closest thing that they were is the National Council of Indigenous. They launched an indigenous candidate, and they tried to have an independent candidate. It didn't work well. Marichu did not even have the registry. I don't think that it was a good tactic, but Zapatismo did not send it. Zapatismo, it was CNE, and they just respected the agreement of CNE, but it's not how we fight. And they have always respected like this. I just want to mention and to highlight at personal level that the Zapatista movement also from this critical vision of how certain ideological currents are managed by governments or where they express their solidarity with the struggle in Nicaragua and the articulation of social movements. They were there, and in fact with a campesino leader. It's interesting how they also listen to other positions, and they criticize those governments that are in a different line of action. I think, yes, they have to send the ideological topic. I think the Manitou is an example of boycott because finally they would not want to have this candidacy to have the power, but to boycott the functions. So to go to the electoral platform, but to make noise, so the indigenous communities could be seen, not much as looking for power. So yes, I don't think it was a strategy maybe, but Marichui was the spokesperson of all that Indigenous Council of Government. And it was the only one, or of the few ones, that did not go to make a campaign, but to be close of the communities. Yes, and there is something interesting to follow the discussion. They have made this mixture of tactics, what we have seen, the campaigns, the strategies. They have done anything, going into an electoral boycott, creating caravans, having meetings, create their own autonomy, alternative institutions that we touched briefly, and now that I'll speak more. But I think this combination of tactics is also something interesting that we have to learn from this movement. They have not stayed only with one. We will have armed fights. No. They will go through the civil way, and let's see how many marches. No, not only that. Let's go to the communities to generate education and autonomy. But they keep going outside, and they are within the current problems like gender violence. So they say, well, now the problem in Mexico now is that they're killing women, so let's do something about it. So they have not only have one topic or strategy, they have opened their scope from the indigenous perspective, environmental feminism, and they have had a tactical flexibility quite interesting. And I think it's something that we need to highlight. So let's see the snails or the caracoles, and this has made this movement stronger. In 2004, they have the first 5 caracoles and the 10th anniversary. And the snail is an indigenous symbol. It's a Maya symbol. It's the word, it's the time. So the snail is the strong symbol of the circular or spiral organization that they have. It's a political indigenous organization form. It is linked to their cosmovision. So they took the name of caracol because they want circular processes of dialogue, of words. The snail is something like a territorial organization. They have something more specific that is called mares. But the snail gathers different municipalities as a territorial, cultural, political, geographical unit. Chiapas is very diverse in its geography. So you have jungle areas, sea areas, high mountains. So each area was divided according to the geographical and cultural characteristics. And this is how the snails arise. And they are organized through this boards of good government. And something interesting, it seems that Zapatismo doesn't make too much noise, but in that sense, they are like a guerrilla. They go out, attack in a non-violent way, and then they come back. And when you least expect it, then they go out. Last year, at the end, they inaugurated 7 new snails. But when they say, well, the autonomy model has not worked, they don't say anything, Zapatism is dead, they were quietly building from within. So this is what I say. It's not that you have to go always to the streets. They spend years in their communities building autonomy, very silently. Nobody knew about it until they have this communication. We broke the circles, and they want to expand. And the model is working because they're growing, because also the living conditions have improved in the communities, and this is quite interesting. My question is, the traditional state? Yes, they have attacks every day. Somebody lives, somebody dies every day. If you go to the page, they are aggressions, harassment, that they are being surrounded, the paramilitaries. They are key both for the national government, the federal government, and the local governments, and especially for the local governments and for other indigenous communities. And this is something sad, how the political parties have divided the movement by giving them money disguised as social help. And this is strategies in all Latin America to create division. Because if you go to the social program, you will have support, the scholarships and food. And this is a way how they have broken Zapatismo. But they have not been able to really be successful because they are growing and they are expanding. And that, I think, is what the use of arms. Even though they do not use it in an offensive, it's a symbol of resistance in a context of paramilitary, of war of low intensity. They do not use the arms offensively, but they have them there. And there are many differences in terms of with other movements that do use arms. Thank you. I wanted to mention, and it has to do with the use of the snails as a symbolic element that unites the community, but also how the states or the governments can take it. For example, in Ecuador, we had this brand, Ecuador Loves Life. We use the snail. So you steal a symbolism to take it to the government and try to include, but what is the use that you do later with the campaign? We speak about a proposal that transcends the neoliberal vision, but in reality we do exactly the same. They use the communities. So we really have to be careful with this because, as we said yesterday, any of the bands or the movements can take it. So in this sense of identity, what is your real identity? And from there to where do we take our marches, and our leaders are sold. So this is exactly what they want to break, and this is what they did. They broke the indigenous movement in the 10 years of Correa's government. In fact, the new government, López Obrador, he seems that he's in favor of the people. In the ceremony when he took power, after the official one with the Senate, he goes to the Zócalo, to the main square in Mexico City, and makes a whole indigenous ceremony. It was a display of flowers and copal, and he even kneeled in front of the shamans. It's that. How they can use also the symbolisms. How they can use the I'm in favor of the indigenous, I'm a good government. Bolivia is another strong case of the use of the indigenous as a political platform, as a strategy also. And it's true. Somebody can please read this, is the phrase that speaks of how they broke the barrier now that they have the new snails or caracoles. We went without asking permission, and now we are with you, brothers, sisters, colleagues. The government border is left behind. We keep tracing routes that are only in the thoughts of our, the minds of our tribes and our elders. They speak about this persistence, about this civil disobedience, that we're not going to ask permission, that we are beyond what is traceable. They have a very strong spirit, and they have maintained it in their struggle. And the boards of a good governance is the ways of political organization of each snail and autonomous municipality, and they are carried out in assemblies and under consensus. There's an anecdote. There was at the board of directors, and they were going to reach an agreement, and the representatives of the government said, but we already have the line in the orders when we were going to say, and they were to the assembly, and they said, no, we want it, this is the government's proposal. And they listened, wrote down, and say, we have to go announce to the community. But they say, you are the representatives, you have to take a decision. The accidental logic, government logic of the powers, you have to solve this right now between us. And the Zapatistas said, no, we have to go back to our communities, discuss with them. And it could take a week to sit down again and to say what had happened from the assemblies, and the representatives of the government were becoming crazy. They wanted to end this in 3 days, and the Zapatistas said, no, we have to first ask the community. So this idea of the consultation, of the agreement, of the assembly, belongs to the Zapatista community. The boards of good government have organized a series of institution production, and just to end, they have created many alternative institutions in the snails and these autonomous municipalities. They have their own schools, hospitals, production centers. They even have their sources of energy. They have hydroelectric power to rebuild the community from downwards. And this is something that we need to highlight. And from the nonviolence, not only is to go to the struggle, to the fight, but also to rebuild and to generate real alternatives to the problems that we live if we do not do this, it's going to be hard to change the things. So I think they're a very good combination between the nonviolent social action and the building of community and autonomy. So here you have some references if you want to check it out. And we open now to the dialogue. Thank you very much for your presentation, Poncho. On what Zapatism represents, I think there are two elements that are the most important ones. The first one is the coherence and the discipline with which they work. They are coherent in all the senses, and this is seen also in the dialectic. For example, to see how a leader says sub-commander, while the woman, the counterpart, in the feminine is the female commander. So you see the level of coherence that is happening. So this is very nice because quite often as activists we let the power go to our heads, and the speech sees this relationship of domination even within the organizations we perceive that we have. So I would like to say that, for example, how the other time, speaking with someone, for a foreigner that had a productive project, he said, I have 10 women. So there, I said, no. Because he wanted to make alliances with our foundation. He said, I have 10 women with whom I work. Well, you cannot possess anyone. So I really take care of those things and pay attention. So the alliance with this person did not work out. The other elements that I like and I really love are the principles of good governance, which is the mandate of Siena. And this is something that we can see and signs the campaigns that they have, because the campaign does not come from ahead, but this comes from what the leader does is to collect or to join all these feelings of the community. And that leadership model that the Zapatistas have, I think is something that we all should learn from. Yes, I don't have time to speak, but my thesis was, I did it on the Zapatista cosmovision. And part of the cosmovision and the language there, in Tzotzil and Chol and Topolabal, which are Chiapas languages, they have a concept that I think it's Calal. I don't remember exactly the term, but speaks about putting the earth together. So this is like Calal. When they are going to reach a consensus, they also see that they also have to reach agreement, and they also use Calal to work with the earth and to reach agreement, because if you level and you generate horizontal relationships, is how you can plant seeds. And this is how the Zapatism is full of metaphors of poetry based in a Maya cosmovision. The Calal, how you should level the land, and also how we should all level together. It's the only way to generate agreement when we are all together. And these are many others. So it's very rich and very interesting.
Thank you very much for sharing this. In the past, I was very interested in the fact that these networks of the Zapatista movement, they wrote a very long letter, very painful, announcing that in 2019 perhaps they were not going to hold a meeting because of matters of management, but there was a series of circumstances that limited. But the meeting took place in the end, and I think there's something else that I rescue and admire deeply, Now we find this as a crisis of international cooperation to have our campaigns and our initiatives go forth, and that they are able to achieve it as well as the entire movement. Also, our friend and anthropologist, she participated last year, and there were so many men and women attending, but many of them do not understand the logic when they participate, where is the catering to be able to see these things that sometimes we don't understand. And these are matters that we have to continue working on, how we can manage this self-management, how things can be done if there's a will and a commitment, and not only wait for things to happen. So everything has to wait for cooperation. Yes, agreed. I have photographs of a meeting of women. We don't have the time. But one more. Okay, I'm taking Paula's time. So anything during the coffee break we can continue talking. Thank you very much.